Story 1. The Load That Grew Heavier. Vincent Kowalski had been hauling freight for 19 years, primarily running routes through the Pacific Northwest. He specialized in oversized loads, machinery, prefabricated structures, industrial equipment that required special permits and careful navigation. On March 3, 2019, Vincent accepted a contract to transport what the manifest described as industrial fabrication components from a facility outside Portland, Oregon to a construction site in Boise, Idaho. The load would change weight during transport in ways that defied physics, and Vincent would discover that some cargo doesn't just occupy space, it consumes it. Vincent arrived at the loading facility at 6:00 a.m. The location was industrial, surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras, but otherwise unremarkable. A supervisor met him at the gate with paperwork and specific loading instructions. The cargo consisted of 12 large metal containers, each approximately 8 feet cubed, made of some kind of dark alloy that Vincent didn't recognize. They looked heavy, industrial, exactly the sort of thing Vincent had been hauling for years. "These need to remain sealed during transport," the supervisor explained, handing Vincent a clipboard with documentation. "Under no circumstances should you open or inspect the containers. They're environmentally sensitive. Exposure to temperature variations or contaminants could damage the contents." Vincent nodded. He'd transported sealed cargo before. "What's the weight?" "Total load is 42,000 pounds, well within your capacity." Vincent watched as a specialized forklift loaded the containers onto his flatbed trailer. Each container was secured with heavy chains and load binders. The supervisor inspected every connection point personally, ensuring the cargo was immobilized. Once loading was complete, Vincent performed his standard pre-trip inspection, checked the securement, and signed the paperwork confirming he'd accepted the load. Vincent's truck scale showed the total weight at 78,340 pounds. His truck, trailer, and cargo combined. Normal, legal, safe. He pulled out of the facility at 7:23 a.m. and headed east toward Interstate 84, which would take him through the Columbia River Gorge and into Idaho. The first hour of driving was routine. Vincent navigated morning traffic out of Portland, merged onto I-84, and settled into the familiar rhythm of long-haul driving. The weather was clear, the road conditions good, and Vincent expected to reach Boise by early evening. Around 8:45 a.m., as Vincent was driving through the Columbia Gorge, he felt something strange. The truck's handling had changed subtly. The steering felt heavier, the suspension stiffer, as if the load had increased. Vincent checked his mirrors and saw the cargo still properly secured, the containers exactly as they'd been loaded. But his truck was definitely handling differently. Vincent pulled into a rest area near Cascade Locks to investigate. He walked around his trailer, inspecting the containers and the securement. Everything appeared normal. The chains were still tight, the load binders still properly tensioned. Nothing had shifted or moved, yet Vincent's years of experience told him something had changed about the weight distribution. He decided to weigh the truck. The rest area had a certified truck scale used by the Oregon Department of Transportation. Vincent pulled onto the scale and waited for the digital display. 83,200 pounds. Vincent stared at the number in confusion. His loaded weight should be approximately 78,000 pounds, but the scale showed nearly 5,000 pounds more. That was impossible. Weight doesn't simply appear. Unless he'd somehow picked up additional cargo without knowing it, which was absurd. The weight should be exactly what it had been when he left Portland. Vincent got out and inspected the truck and trailer again, looking for anything that could explain the additional weight. He found nothing. No additional cargo, no accumulation of mud or debris, nothing that could account for 5,000 pounds. He weighed the truck again, thinking the scale must be malfunctioning. The display showed 83,450 pounds, 250 pounds heavier than it had been 5 minutes earlier. Vincent felt cold fear spreading through his chest. The weight was increasing while he sat stationary. That violated every law of physics he understood. Mass doesn't spontaneously generate. Weight doesn't increase without adding physical matter. He grabbed his phone and called the loading facility in Portland. After being transferred twice, he reached the supervisor who'd overseen the loading. "This is Vincent Kowalski. I'm hauling your load to Boise, and I've got a serious problem. The weight is increasing during transport. My truck weighed 78,000 pounds when I left. Now it's over 83,000 and still climbing." There was a long pause. "Mr. Kowalski, that's not possible. The cargo weight is fixed at 42,000 pounds. Your scale must be malfunctioning." "I'm on a certified DOT scale. It's not malfunctioning. The weight is actually increasing. What's in those containers?" Another pause, longer this time. "The contents are proprietary. As stated in your contract, you're not authorized to know the specific nature of the cargo. Just deliver it as specified." "I'm not delivering anything until I understand what's happening. If this weight keeps increasing, I'll be overweight, illegal, and potentially unsafe. I need to know what I'm carrying." "Mr. Kowalski, you signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of your contract. The contents are sealed for good reasons. I assure you the cargo is not dangerous. Any weight fluctuations you're experiencing are instrumentation errors. Please continue with the delivery." "This isn't an instrumentation error. I can feel the difference in how the truck handles. The cargo is actually getting heavier." "That's physically impossible, Mr. Kowalski. Please continue to Boise. You'll be compensated for any delays or concerns." The supervisor disconnected. Vincent stood beside his truck, staring at the 12 sealed containers, trying to decide what to do. His contract obligated him to deliver the cargo. The compensation was excellent, nearly triple his normal rate for a load this size. But if the weight continued increasing, he'd be operating illegally, and if he was stopped at a weigh station, he'd face massive fines or worse. Vincent got back in his truck and pulled off the scale. He'd continue toward Boise but monitor the situation carefully. If the weight kept increasing, he'd have to make a decision about whether to abandon the load. As Vincent merged back onto I-84 and continued east, the handling changes became more pronounced. The truck felt increasingly sluggish, the brakes less effective, the acceleration slower. It was as if he was pulling far more weight than his truck's specifications allowed. Around 11 a.m., Vincent passed a weigh station near the Dalles, Oregon. The station was open and operating. Vincent knew he should pull in for the mandatory commercial vehicle inspection, but he was terrified of what the scales would show. If his weight had continued increasing, he'd be significantly overweight, and the penalties could include impoundment of his truck and criminal charges. Vincent made a split-second decision and bypassed the weigh station, using the route that allowed permitted oversized loads to skip the scales. It was technically legal since he had oversized permits, but Vincent felt like a criminal as he passed. 20 miles past the weigh station, Vincent's phone rang. It was the Oregon State Police. "Mr. Kowalski, this is Sergeant Davis with OSP Commercial Vehicle Enforcement. You bypassed the weigh station at the Dalles. We need you to return immediately for inspection." Vincent's heart sank. "I have oversized permits I'm allowed to bypass." "We're aware of your permits, but we received a flag on your vehicle from a previous waypoint. Your weight has been increasing abnormally between scale locations. This is a safety concern. Return to the Dalles immediately or we'll issue a warrant and intercept you by force." Vincent had no choice. He took the next exit, turned around and drove back to the weigh station. 2 patrol cars were waiting along with several commercial vehicle inspectors. Vincent was directed to pull onto the scales and shut down his engine. The lead inspector approached. "Mr. Kowalski, please step out of the vehicle." Vincent complied, his hands shaking. The inspector walked around the truck and trailer, examining the cargo containers closely. "What are you hauling?" "Industrial fabrication components. That's all the manifest says." "Where's it going?" "Construction site in Boise." The inspector consulted a tablet reviewing data. "Mr. Kowalski, your truck weighed 78 and 340 pounds when you left the Portland facility at 7:23 this morning. You weighed 83 and 450 pounds at Cascade Locks at 9:07 a.m. That's a gain of 5,110 pounds in less than 2 hours. Now our current scale shows you at 91,680 pounds. That's a gain of over 13,000 pounds in less than 4 hours. Can you explain this?" Vincent felt dizzy. "I can't explain it. The cargo is sealed. I was told not to open the containers, but the weight is definitely increasing. I can feel it in how the truck handles." "Mr. Kowalski, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you picking up additional cargo at stops? Is someone loading material onto your trailer without proper documentation?" "No, absolutely not. I've made 2 stops, both at rest areas. The cargo has been in my sight the entire time. Nothing has been added." The inspector looked troubled. "Then we have a serious problem because weight doesn't spontaneously increase. I'm going to need to inspect the cargo containers." The shipper said they're sealed, environmentally sensitive. Opening them could damage the contents. "Mr. Kowalski, you're currently over 11,000 pounds overweight based on your documented load. That's a massive safety violation. Either we open these containers and determine what's happening, or I impound your vehicle and cargo pending a full investigation. Your choice." Vincent thought about his contract, the non-disclosure agreement, the penalties for violating the terms. But he also thought about his commercial driver's license, his livelihood, his legal liability if something went seriously wrong. "Open them," Vincent said. The inspector called for tools. 2 other inspectors approached the flatbed with bolt cutters and pry bars, preparing to access the sealed containers. They started with the container closest to the trailer's front, a dark alloy box secured with industrial bolts and what appeared to be welding along the seams. As the inspectors worked to open the container, Vincent noticed something disturbing. The trailer was sitting lower on its suspension than it had been earlier. The tires looked compressed, the frame closer to the axles. His truck was definitely carrying more weight than it had been. It took nearly 20 minutes to breach the first container's seals. When the inspector finally pried open the lid, everyone stepped back instinctively. Vincent couldn't see inside from his position, but he watched the inspectors' faces change from curiosity to confusion to something like fear. "What the hell is that?" one of them muttered. Vincent walked closer. Inside the container was a substance that looked like liquid metal, mercury or something similar. But it was moving in ways that liquid shouldn't move. It flowed upward along the container walls, defying gravity, forming patterns and structures that collapsed and reformed continuously. The substance appeared to be alive, or at least responsive to some force Vincent couldn't perceive. "Is that mercury?" the lead inspector asked. "I don't know," Vincent said honestly. "I was never told what the cargo was." One of the inspectors extended a measurement probe into the container, trying to gauge the depth of the liquid. The probe sank about 6 inches, then stopped as if hitting a solid surface. But there was no solid surface visible, just the flowing, pattern-forming liquid. "The density is wrong," the inspector said, reading instruments. "This stuff is impossibly dense. It's registering as weighing about 4,000 pounds per cubic foot. That's nearly twice the density of lead. No naturally occurring substance on Earth is this dense except maybe osmium or iridium, and those don't exist in liquid form at normal temperatures." Vincent felt sick. "How much does that container weigh?" The inspector did quick calculations. If the entire container is filled with this substance, approximately 16,000 pounds per container. Times 12 containers, That's 192,000 pounds. Vincent's vision blurred. That's impossible. My truck can't carry that weight. The trailer would collapse. I couldn't move with that load. And yet you've been driving with it for 4 hours, the inspector said, his voice shaking slightly. Mr. Kowalski, this doesn't make sense on any level. Your truck shouldn't be able to move with this weight. The trailer should have catastrophically failed. The tires should have exploded. You should be completely immobilized. As they stood there trying to process the impossible situation, Vincent noticed something that made his terror escalate to new levels. The open container's liquid was flowing out, spilling over the sides, but instead of falling to the ground, it was flowing into the sealed containers adjacent to it. The substance was redistributing itself, moving between containers despite the fact that they were supposedly sealed. "It's moving," Vincent said, pointing. "The stuff is moving between containers." The inspectors watched in horror as the liquid metal flowed across the flatbed, seeping through microscopic gaps or perhaps creating its own pathways. Within minutes, the open container was empty, its contents redistributed to the other 11 sealed containers. "We need to evacuate this area," Sergeant Davis said, reaching for his radio. "This is beyond our capacity to handle. We need hazmat, we need federal agencies, we need people who understand what the hell this is." But as the sergeant spoke, the trailer began to sink lower. The tires compressed further. The suspension groaned. The weight was continuing to increase, concentrating, becoming denser. "Everyone back!" the lead inspector shouted. "The trailer is going to collapse." They ran from the trailer just as the suspension failed completely. The trailer's axles bent, the tires exploded like gunshots, and the entire flatbed dropped to the pavement with a sound of tortured metal. The force of the impact cracked the concrete way station platform. Vincent watched in horror as his trailer, which should have weighed maybe 50,000 pounds fully loaded, hit the pavement with the impact of something far, far heavier. The concrete didn't just crack, it shattered in a crater-like depression as if a meteorite had struck it. The 11 sealed containers sat in the wreckage, undamaged, containing something that was impossibly dense and apparently still increasing in mass. Vincent's truck, still connected to the trailer by the fifth wheel coupling, was being pulled backward by the weight. The parking brake couldn't hold. The truck began sliding toward the collapsed trailer. "Disconnect the fifth wheel!" someone shouted. Vincent ran to his truck and released the fifth wheel coupling. The trailer separated from the truck and Vincent's vehicle rolled forward, finally free of the impossible weight. Emergency services arrived within 15 minutes. Police, fire department, hazmat teams, and eventually unmarked vehicles containing people in suits who wouldn't identify which agency they represented. The area was evacuated and cordoned off. Vincent was questioned extensively by multiple agencies, always giving the same answers. He didn't know what he was transporting. He'd been told it was industrial components. The weight had increased during transport in violation of all known physics. The loading facility in Portland was raided that same afternoon. It was empty, completely abandoned. No equipment, no personnel, no records. It was as if the facility had never been operational, despite the fact that Vincent had picked up cargo there just hours earlier. Over the following days, scientists and military specialists attempted to study the containers and their contents. Vincent learned fragments of information through news reports and interviews with investigators. The substance in the containers was not any known element or compound. It was possibly some kind of exotic matter or dense material from outside Earth's normal physical parameters. Its mass was continuing to increase exponentially, suggesting it was either accumulating matter from its surroundings or accessing mass from another dimension. Within a week, the containers had become so heavy they'd sunk through multiple layers of substrate beneath the way station. Attempts to move or contain them failed because no equipment could lift or manipulate the weight. The mass was measured in the thousands of tons and still increasing. The area was eventually classified as a permanent exclusion zone. The containers continued to sink, descending through earth and rock, creating a shaft that geologists predicted would eventually reach the mantle. The theory was that the substance was seeking gravitational equilibrium, trying to reach Earth's center of mass, and nothing humans could engineer would stop it. Vincent's truck and trailer were declared a total loss, classified as government property due to national security implications. He was compensated financially but required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. The incident was never publicly explained beyond vague references to industrial accident and hazardous material incident. But Vincent knows what he carried that day. He transported something that shouldn't exist in normal physics, matter that was denser and heavier than anything found naturally in our universe, possibly a sample of neutron star material or something even more exotic. Someone or something had been moving it across the country, and Vincent had been selected as an unwitting courier. Vincent never drove commercially again. The experience shattered his trust in cargo manifests, in shipping contracts, in the assumption that what you're hauling is what you think you're hauling. He retired early, living on his compensation settlement and the nightmares of knowing he'd transported something impossible. Something that was still sinking through Earth's crust, possibly heading toward the core, its final destination unknowable. The way station site in the Dalles was eventually closed and built over with a concrete cap. But beneath that cap, the shaft continues deeper, following the containers as they sink through layers of rock and mineral, pulled by their own impossible weight toward the center of the planet. Vincent sometimes wonders what would have happened if he'd completed the delivery to Boise. Would the containers have stopped increasing in mass? Would they have detonated or collapsed into a singularity? Or would they have simply continued growing heavier until they'd created a gravitational anomaly, a point of such density that it warped space-time around it? He'll never know. But he knows this. Some cargo is not meant to be delivered. Some loads carry weight beyond what any truck, any driver, any infrastructure can bear. And some manifests lie about what they're asking you to transport. Vincent's advice to other drivers is simple. If a load feels heavier than it should, if the weight seems to be increasing, if your truck handles differently than the documented weight suggests, stop immediately. Don't continue. Don't try to complete the delivery. Because some cargo doesn't just occupy space and weight. Some cargo bends reality, violates physics, and threatens to pull everything around it into gravitational collapse. The load that grew heavier nearly created a hole through the planet. And somewhere deep beneath Oregon, those containers continue their journey downward, carrying impossible weight toward an unknown destination, forever beyond human control or understanding. Story 2. The driver who delivered himself. Robert Chen had been an independent owner-operator for 16 years, running time-sensitive deliveries primarily along the West Coast. On August 8, 2020, Robert accepted a rush delivery contract that offered extraordinary compensation for what appeared to be a simple overnight run from San Francisco to Los Angeles. The cargo manifest listed medical equipment, time-sensitive, and the delivery window was tight but manageable. Robert would discover that this delivery was unlike any other he'd made, because the recipient at the destination would be himself, and the cargo he was transporting was his own truck with himself inside it, in a paradox that would trap him in a loop of delivering himself to himself for what might be eternity. Robert picked up the cargo at a medical research facility in South San Francisco at 9 p.m. The load consisted of 6 large insulated crates, each marked with biohazard symbols and temperature monitoring equipment. A technician supervised the loading and handed Robert detailed instructions. These must maintain a constant temperature of exactly 37 degrees Celsius, the technician explained. The refrigeration unit must not fail. If temperature deviates by more than 1 degree, call this number immediately. She handed Robert a card with a phone number. What happens if the temperature deviates? Robert asked. The samples degrade. They become useless. Just maintain the temperature and deliver by 6 a.m. The recipient will be waiting. Robert secured the cargo and programmed his GPS for the delivery address in Los Angeles, a medical facility in Pasadena. The route was straightforward, US 101 south through the night, approximately 380 miles, roughly 6 hours of driving with no stops. Robert had made this run dozens of times. Easy money. Robert departed at 9:32 p.m. and headed south through San Francisco. Traffic was moderate, the weather clear, and everything felt routine. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily, maintaining the specified temperature. Robert settled in for a long night of driving, listening to podcasts and monitoring his progress. Around 11 p.m., as Robert was passing through San Jose, his GPS recalculated the route. The device's voice announced, "Route recalculating. Proceed to the highlighted route." Robert glanced at the screen. The GPS was directing him to exit the highway and take a surface street route through San Jose. That didn't make sense. US 101 was the fastest route. Why would the GPS suggest a slower alternative? Robert ignored the recalculation and continued on US 101. Within minutes, the GPS recalculated again, more insistently. Then his phone rang, the number from the card the technician had given him. "Mr. Chen, this is dispatch. You need to follow the GPS route exactly as provided. The alternate route is mandatory for this delivery." "The alternate route is slower. I'll miss the delivery window." "The route accounts for the delivery window. You must follow it exactly. This is a contractual requirement." Robert felt uneasy but complied. He took the next exit and followed the GPS onto surface streets through San Jose. The route took him through industrial areas, past warehouses and manufacturing facilities, all of them dark and closed for the night. Around midnight, as Robert was navigating a particularly desolate industrial area, his truck's headlights illuminated something ahead that made his breath catch. There was a truck stopped in the middle of the road, a truck identical to his own. Same make, same model, same company logo, same unit number. Robert stopped about 50 feet behind the identical truck. He sat frozen, staring at his own truck, or what appeared to be his own truck, blocking the road ahead. The truck's hazard lights were on, but Robert couldn't see a driver in the cab. Robert grabbed his flashlight and walked toward the stopped truck cautiously. As he approached, he could see through the driver's window. The cab was empty, no driver, no personal items, completely vacant. But the truck was running, refrigeration unit operating, hazard lights flashing. Robert walked around to the trailer and checked the cargo. 6 insulated crates marked with biohazard symbols identical to the cargo Robert was carrying. Everything about this truck was a perfect duplicate of his own vehicle and load. Robert's phone rang. "Mr. Chen, continue past the stopped vehicle and proceed with your delivery. Do not investigate further. There's a truck blocking the road, a truck identical to mine. What is this?" "The route has been cleared. Continue forward." Robert walked back to his truck, deeply unsettled. When he looked forward again, the stopped truck was gone. The road ahead was completely empty. There had been no sound of an engine starting, no movement. The truck had simply ceased to exist. Robert continued forward, following the GPS directions, which now routed him back to US 101. He'd lost about 20 minutes with the detour, but he could make up the time if he drove steadily. Around 2 a.m., as Robert was passing through the desolate stretch of US 101 through Southern California, his refrigeration unit alarm sounded. The temperature had dropped to 35 degrees Celsius, below the specified range. Robert immediately pulled onto the shoulder and checked the unit. It appeared to be functioning normally, but the internal temperature continued to drop. 34 degrees, 33 degrees, 32 degrees. Robert called the emergency number. "This is Chen. My refrigeration unit is malfunctioning. Temperature is dropping rapidly. Mr. Chen, open cargo bay door 3 and check for ice formation on the secondary cooling coil." Robert didn't have a cargo bay door 3. His trailer configuration didn't match that description. But he walked around the trailer anyway, looking for any access panel that might correspond. On the trailer's right side, there was an access panel he'd never noticed before. A small door marked 3. Robert opened it and found himself looking into a space that shouldn't exist. The interior was larger than his trailer's dimensions allowed, extending back and down in ways that violated the external geometry. And inside this impossible space, Robert saw more crates, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all identical to the 6 he was supposedly carrying, all marked with biohazard symbols. Robert stumbled backward and called the number again. "What the hell is in my trailer? There are way more crates than I loaded. The space inside is bigger than the trailer." "Mr. Chen, close the access panel and continue with your delivery. The cargo manifest is accurate. You are carrying 6 crates. I'm looking at hundreds of crates. You are experiencing perceptual distortion due to fatigue. Close the panel. Continue driving. You will be fine." Robert closed the panel, his hands shaking. The refrigeration alarm had stopped. The temperature had returned to 37 degrees Celsius. Robert got back in his truck and continued driving. But his sense of reality was fragmenting. Around 4:00 a.m., as Robert approached the outskirts of Los Angeles, his GPS directed him to exit US 101 early and take another surface street route through industrial areas. Robert followed the directions, too exhausted and frightened to argue. The route took him to a large warehouse complex. The GPS indicated this was the delivery location, though the address didn't match what Robert had been given originally. Robert pulled up to a loading dock as directed. Lights came on automatically, illuminating the area. A figure approached from the building, a person wearing a driver's uniform. As the figure came closer, Robert felt vertigo and terror merge into a single, overwhelming sensation. The person approaching was Robert Chen. Same face, same build, same uniform, same exhausted expression. "I've been waiting for you," the other Robert said through Robert's rolled-down window. "You're right on schedule." "Who? What?" Robert couldn't form coherent questions. "I'm you. Or rather, I'm you from the next iteration. I received this delivery 4 hours ago. Now you're delivering it to me so I can deliver it to the next version 4 hours from now." "We're caught in a loop, Robert. The cargo isn't medical equipment, it's us. We're transporting ourselves through time." Robert's mind reeled. "That's insane. You're not me. This is some kind of trick. Check your wallet. Look at your driver's license." Robert pulled out his wallet with shaking hands. His driver's license photo showed his face, but the expiration date was wrong. It showed a date 5 years in the future, and his birth date was different, showing him as 5 years younger than he actually was. "Time isn't stable in this loop," the other Robert explained. "Each iteration shifts us slightly, sometimes forward, sometimes backward. I've done this delivery 17 times now. Each time I receive the cargo from my past self and deliver it to my future self. The loop has been running for what I think is years, but time perception breaks down after a few iterations. How do I get out? I don't know. I've tried breaking the loop, refusing to deliver, opening the crates, destroying the cargo. But every time I try, I wake up back at the pickup location in San Francisco at 9:30 p.m., starting over. The loop resets. We're trapped in this delivery, Robert. We're both the cargo and the driver. We're delivering ourselves to ourselves forever." Robert looked at the trailer. "What's really in those crates?" "I don't know. I've never successfully opened them. They're sealed with something I can't breach. But I think they contain information, the data that defines us. Our patterns, our consciousness, maybe our quantum state. Someone or something is using us to transport ourselves through time, creating a stable loop that preserves our existence in multiple temporal positions simultaneously. Who's doing this? Who set up this delivery? I don't know that either. The facility in San Francisco doesn't exist outside the loop. I've tried to investigate between deliveries, but I always run out of time before the next pickup. We're on a schedule, Robert. 4-hour intervals. We pick up, we deliver, we receive, we deliver again. Forever. Robert began to cry. I have a family. I have a life outside of this. How do I get back to them? You don't. Or you haven't yet. I've been trying for 17 iterations. Maybe you'll figure something out that I haven't. Maybe one of our future iterations will break the loop, but for now you need to unload your cargo so I can load it back onto your truck and you can continue the loop. The two Roberts worked together to unload the 6 crates from Robert's truck and load them onto a dolly. As they worked, Robert noticed something disturbing about his doppelganger. The other Robert was slightly translucent, not fully solid. He was becoming less real with each iteration, fading as the loop consumed his substantiality. You're disappearing, Robert said. I know. Each iteration takes something. Eventually, I think we'll fade completely, become just patterns without physical form. Maybe that's the goal, to reduce us to pure information that can be transmitted more efficiently through time. After unloading the crates, the other Robert helped load them back onto Robert's truck. The same 6 crates returned to the same positions, ready for the next delivery 4 hours from now. Where do I deliver these? Robert asked. Follow the GPS. It'll route you through the same path you took to get here. In 4 hours, you'll arrive back at this location and you'll meet yourself, the version of you that's 4 hours younger, the one who just arrived from San Francisco. You'll help him unload, just like I helped you. Then you'll load the crates back onto his truck and he'll continue the loop while you wait for the next iteration. This is hell, Robert whispered. Yes, the other Robert agreed. But it's the hell we're trapped in. At least we have each other. At least we're not alone in it. Robert drove away from the warehouse, following the GPS route that would take him back to the same location in 4 hours. As he drove, he tried to understand the logic of the loop. He was transporting cargo that was somehow himself, or the information that defined him. Each iteration, he delivered himself to himself 4 hours ahead, who would then deliver to himself 4 hours further ahead, creating an infinite chain of Roberts separated by 4-hour intervals, all trapped in the same delivery loop. But why? Who had created this loop? What was the purpose? Robert tried to deviate from the GPS route, to break the pattern. But every time he attempted to exit the prescribed path, his truck's controls stopped responding. The vehicle would drive itself back to the correct route. He was a passenger in his own truck, forced to follow the loop's requirements. 4 hours later, Robert arrived back at the warehouse. Another truck was pulling in. Robert's truck, driven by Robert Chen, arriving for the first time with the cargo from San Francisco. Robert watched himself pull up to the loading dock, watched himself climb out with an expression of confusion and fear. Robert approached his past self and said the same words that had been said to him 4 hours earlier. I've been waiting for you. You're right on schedule. He helped his past self unload the crates and load them back onto the truck. He watched himself drive away, continuing the loop, and Robert waited at the warehouse for the next iteration, for another Robert to arrive in 4 hours, for another cycle of the infinite delivery. Days passed, or what felt like days, though time had become meaningless. Robert lost count of the iterations, 20, 50, 100. Each time he received himself, unloaded himself, loaded himself, and sent himself forward to the next iteration. Each time he noticed he was slightly more translucent, slightly less solid, slowly fading as the loop consumed his physical reality. Robert tried everything he could think of to break the loop. He tried smashing the crates. They were indestructible. He tried abandoning the delivery. He'd wake up back at the San Francisco facility at 9 p.m. starting over. He tried staying awake past the 4-hour interval. He'd fall unconscious and wake up at the next scheduled pickup. The loop was perfect, unbreakable, a temporal prison that used Robert himself as both the prisoner and the cage. Somewhere around the 50th iteration, Robert stopped fighting. He accepted his role. He became efficient at the loading and unloading, at greeting his past self, at sending his future self forward. He became part of the machinery of the loop, a human component in a temporal delivery system that had no beginning, no end, only infinite middle. Robert wondered if there were other loops like this, other drivers trapped in temporal delivery cycles, transporting themselves or others through time in patterns they couldn't break. Were the highways full of these loops, invisible to normal traffic, running parallel to normal deliveries but existing outside normal causality? He'd never know. He was too busy delivering himself to investigate other possibilities. The iterations continued. Robert became progressively more translucent, more ghost-like, less physically present. He could see through his own hands. His reflection in mirrors was barely visible. He was becoming information pattern without substance, exactly as the fading version of himself had predicted. And still the deliveries continued. Pick up at 9 p.m., drive through the night, deliver at 4 a.m., wait for the next iteration. Load, unload, repeat, forever. Robert Chen no longer remembers his family clearly. He no longer remembers what life was like before the loop. He exists only in the 4-hour intervals, only in the act of delivering himself to himself, only in the eternal present of the temporal loop that has consumed his existence. If you're driving through California late at night and you see a truck that seems slightly translucent, slightly unreal, driven by a figure that appears ghost-like behind the wheel, that might be Robert Chen delivering himself to himself for the 10,000th time, trapped in a loop that uses highways as temporal corridors and drivers as vehicles for transporting consciousness through time. The delivery never ends. The loop never breaks. And Robert Chen continues to transport himself to himself, forever arriving at a destination that is simultaneously his origin, forever receiving cargo that is simultaneously himself, forever trapped in the act of delivering because he is both the driver and the freight, both the origin and the destination, both the cause and the effect of his own eternal journey. Some deliveries can't be completed because completing them would end them, and some loops exist specifically to prevent their own conclusion. Robert Chen learned this too late, after accepting a delivery that offered extraordinary compensation for what appeared to be a simple overnight run. The loop continues, Robert continues, the delivery continues. And somewhere in California at 4-hour intervals, the same truck carrying the same cargo drives the same route, delivering the same driver to the same destination, over and over, forever. Story 3. The static between stations. Margaret Holloway had been driving long haul for 14 years, specializing in overnight deliveries across the American Midwest. On April 19, 2021, Margaret was running a standard freight delivery from Chicago to Denver when her radio began picking up a station that shouldn't exist. The broadcast would pull her into a reality where radio signals didn't just carry information. They carried entire worlds, entire timelines, entire versions of existence that existed in the static between legitimate stations. And Margaret would have to choose which frequency represented reality and which represented the infinite alternatives that lived in the spaces between. Margaret left Chicago at 8 p.m. with a full load of commercial electronics. The The route would take her west through Iowa and Nebraska before entering Colorado and arriving in Denver approximately 20 hours later. It was a route she'd driven dozens of times, familiar and unremarkable. Around 11:00 p.m., as Margaret was driving through rural Iowa on Interstate 80, she began scanning through radio stations. The FM dial offered only country music, Christian broadcasting, and static. Out of habit, Margaret switched to AM, where she could sometimes find talk radio or distant stations broadcasting from major cities. She turned the dial slowly. 540, 600, 670, mostly static with occasional fragments of speech or music bleeding through from distant transmitters. Then at 8:40 a.m. she found something unusual. A voice, crystal clear with no static or interference. You're listening to Radio Nowhere, broadcasting from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. I'm your host and you're my listener. We're both trapped between frequencies now, Margaret. Margaret's blood ran cold. The radio host had used her name. That wasn't possible unless this was some kind of personalized streaming service. But this was AM radio, not internet streaming. There was no way for an AM broadcast to know who was listening. Margaret reached to change the station, but the voice continued. Don't change the dial, Margaret Holloway. You found us or we've found you. Either way, you're tuned in now. And once you're tuned into Radio Nowhere, tuning out becomes complicated. This isn't funny, Margaret said aloud, though she knew the radio couldn't hear her. This is some kind of prank. Not a prank, a phenomenon. You're listening to a station that exists in the space between stations, in the frequencies that aren't assigned, in the empty bandwidth where reality becomes uncertain. We broadcast alternate timelines, Margaret. Different versions of the world, different versions of you. Margaret turned the dial, trying to find a different station, but no matter where she turned it, 560, 700, 920, 1100, she kept hearing the same voice on every frequency. You can't tune me out, Margaret. I'm not on a frequency. I'm between all of them. I'm in the static. Margaret turned off the radio completely. Silence filled her cab, broken only by the rumble of her engine and the road noise. She drove for 10 minutes in complete silence, trying to calm her racing heart. Then the radio turned itself back on. The voice returned. Turning off the radio doesn't disconnect you from Radio Nowhere. You're tuned in at a deeper level now. Consciousness to broadcast, not just radio to radio. Let me show you what we do here. The voice was replaced by what sounded like a news broadcast. And in tonight's main story, President Holloway announced today that the United States would be opening diplomatic relations with the Martian colonies. This marks the first official recognition of the Mars settlements as an independent nation. Margaret felt vertigo. President Holloway, the Martian colonies, none of that was real. The broadcast continued. In related news, First Gentleman James Holloway accompanied the president to the signing ceremony. Sources say this historic agreement was made possible by the president's personal connection to the Martian settlements. Her grandfather was among the original colonists in 2047. Margaret's grandfather had died in 2003. He'd never colonized Mars. Mars had never been colonized. This was fiction, fantasy, some kind of elaborate alternate reality storytelling. But the voice of the news anchor sounded exactly like Margaret's own voice. Margaret grabbed her phone and searched for President Holloway and Martian colonies. No results. Of course not. It was fiction. She was listening to some kind of audio drama designed to sound like news. The broadcast changed again, this time to what sounded like a weather report. Tonight's forecast for the Denver area calls for clear skies with temperatures dropping to near freezing. Traffic on I-80 should be clear for commercial vehicles with no delays expected. Margaret Holloway, driving westbound in truck number 2849, should arrive in Denver approximately 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Margaret nearly swerved off the road. The weather report had identified her specifically. Her name, her truck number, her estimated arrival time. That information wasn't public. That information shouldn't be accessible to a radio broadcast. "How do you know who I am?" Margaret shouted at the radio. The voice returned, the original host voice, calm and unsettling. "Radio Nowhere knows all its listeners intimately, Margaret. We have to. Because we're not broadcasting to you, we're broadcasting from you. Your consciousness, your possibilities, your alternate timelines. We're the station that shows you all the versions of yourself that exist in quantum superposition. All the Margarets that might be if different choices had been made." "That's pseudoscience bullshit," Margaret said. "Quantum superposition doesn't work that way. Doesn't it? Every choice creates a branch, Margaret. Every decision splits reality into the path taken and the paths not taken. You're listening to broadcasts from the paths not taken. The versions of you that exist in parallel timelines, living different lives, making different choices." The broadcast changed again. This time, Margaret heard her own voice. Definitely her own voice, not an impersonator or sound-alike. "This is Margaret Holloway, Chief of Surgery at Denver Medical Center. Today we performed the first successful brain-to-computer interface transplant, marking a new era in medical technology." Margaret felt her reality fracturing. That wasn't her. She wasn't a doctor, she was a truck driver. But the voice was absolutely, unmistakably hers. "That's you in another timeline," the host explained. "In that version of events, you chose medical school instead of truck driving school. You chose education over immediate work. You chose a different path, and you became a different Margaret." The broadcast changed again. Margaret Holloway reporting live from the International Space Station, where today we celebrated the 1-year anniversary of continuous human presence in orbit. And again, "This is Agent Holloway with the FBI. We've just apprehended the serial killer who's been terrorizing the Midwest for the past 3 years." And again, "Margaret Holloway here with tonight's late-night comedy show. Our first guest tonight is..." Each broadcast featured a different version of Margaret: doctor, astronaut, FBI agent, comedian. Each living a completely different life, each equally real in some parallel timeline. And Margaret could hear all of them simultaneously, her consciousness fractured across infinite possibilities. "Stop it!" Margaret screamed, "and I don't want to hear this. I want to listen to normal radio." "There is no normal radio anymore, Margaret. You're too deep in the frequencies now. You're tuned into Radio Nowhere, and we broadcast forever. All timelines, all possibilities, all versions of yourself that exist in the infinite branches of quantum reality." Margaret tried smashing the radio with her fist. The unit cracked. The display went dark, but the voice continued broadcasting directly into her mind. "The radio is just a receiver, Margaret, but you're the actual antenna. You're picking up the broadcasts because you're connected to all these timelines through quantum entanglement. Every alternate Margaret is still you at some level, still connected through the quantum foam that underlies reality." Margaret pulled off the highway at the next exit, desperate to escape, to find help, to get away from the voice that was fracturing her sense of self. But as she drove through the small Iowa town, every radio she passed, car radios, radios in shop windows, even someone's phone playing music, all of them broadcast the same voice. "Radio Nowhere is everywhere you are, Margaret. We're tuned into your consciousness. The only way to stop hearing us is to stop existing, and we both know you're not going to do that." Margaret sat in a parking lot for hours crying, trying to block out the voices of infinite alternate Margarets living infinite alternate lives. But they kept broadcasting, kept telling their stories, kept showing her all the paths she didn't take, all the versions of herself she might have been. Around 3 a.m., exhausted and mentally shattered, Margaret heard a different voice on Radio Nowhere. a voice she recognized with shock. "Hi, Mom, it's Sarah. I know you're scared. I know this is confusing, but you need to understand I'm real. In this timeline, you had a daughter. You raised me. We had a life together, and I miss you, Mom. I miss you so much." Margaret had never had children. She'd never been pregnant, never given birth, never raised a daughter named Sarah. But the voice on the radio was absolutely convinced that Margaret was her mother, was telling stories about their life together, memories that didn't exist in Margaret's timeline but were absolutely real in another. "Sarah isn't real," Margaret whispered. "I don't have a daughter." "In your timeline, you don't," the host voice explained. "But in 17 other timelines accessible through Radio Nowhere, you do. Sarah exists in those timelines. She's your daughter there, and she's trying to reach you across the quantum divide, trying to connect with the version of you that doesn't remember her but might feel the connection anyway." "Make it stop," Margaret begged. "Please make it stop." "I can't make it stop, Margaret. Once you're tuned into Radio Nowhere, you remain tuned in forever. You're hearing the broadcasts from the space between realities. The only choice you have is whether to accept all the alternate Margarets as part of your larger self, or to reject them and be tormented by their voices." Margaret made a decision. If she couldn't stop hearing the broadcasts, she would choose her reality and hold on to it. She started her truck and got back on the highway, heading west toward Denver. And as she drove, she spoke aloud, anchoring herself. "I am Margaret Holloway. I am a truck driver. I have driven this route dozens of times. I am hauling electronics from Chicago to Denver. This is my reality. This is my timeline." The broadcasts from Radio Nowhere continued. Alternate Margarets living alternate lives. Sarah calling out for a mother who didn't exist in this timeline. Infinite possibilities speaking simultaneously. But Margaret focused on her driving, on the physical reality of steering wheel and accelerator and road markers. She made it to Denver by 6 a.m., exactly on schedule. She delivered her cargo, signed the paperwork, and began the return trip to Chicago. And through it all, Radio Nowhere broadcast in her mind. Quieter now, more like background noise than overwhelming cacophony. Margaret learned to live with the voices. Over weeks and months, she developed techniques to filter them, to acknowledge their existence without letting them dominate her consciousness. She heard alternate versions of herself getting married, getting divorced, dying young, living to old age, succeeding, failing, making every possible choice in every possible way. And occasionally she heard Sarah, the daughter she'd never had, calling out from timelines where Margaret had made different choices. Margaret even began responding, speaking to Sarah late at night on empty highways, having conversations with a daughter who existed in quantum superposition but not in physical reality. Other drivers began reporting similar experiences, hearing Radio Nowhere, being contacted by alternate versions of themselves, learning about timelines where their choices led to different outcomes. The phenomenon spread, or perhaps it had always been there and was only now being acknowledged. Scientists couldn't explain it. Psychiatrists dismissed it as mass hysteria or shared delusion. But the drivers knew the truth. They were tuned into frequencies between frequencies, hearing broadcasts from the quantum foam where all possible realities existed simultaneously. Margaret still drives. She still delivers freight. She still makes choices that create new timeline branches. But now she's aware of those branches, can hear them speaking through Radio Nowhere, can feel the weight of all the Margarets she might have been. It's maddening. It's enlightening. It's the price of being tuned into a station that exists between all stations, broadcasting from the static where reality becomes probabilistic and every version of yourself speaks simultaneously. Radio Nowhere is still broadcasting. It's always broadcasting, and if you're driving late at night through remote areas, scanning through AM frequencies looking for something to listen to, Be careful which station you tune into. Because once you hear the voice that knows your name, once you're connected to the broadcasts from between realities, you'll never tune it out completely. You'll hear yourself forever. All the versions of yourself, all the choices you didn't make, all the lives you didn't live. And you'll have to decide whether that knowledge is a gift or a curse, whether hearing your alternate selves makes you more complete or more fragmented. Margaret hasn't decided yet, but she's still listening, still driving, still tuned into Radio Nowhere as it broadcasts all the ways her life might have gone and all the Margarets she might have been. The static between stations isn't empty. It's full of voices, full of lives, full of infinite possibilities speaking all at once. And once you hear them, you'll never unhear them. Radio Nowhere broadcasts forever, and its listeners listen forever. Tuned into frequencies that don't officially exist, hearing timelines that aren't officially real. Connected to versions of themselves that exist in the space between certainties. Margaret Holloway is still out there driving through the night, listening to all the Margarets she might have been, occasionally speaking to a daughter who exists in 17 timelines but not in this one. Still anchored to her reality but forever aware of all the others. The static speaks, the alternate selves broadcast, and Radio Nowhere continues its eternal transmission from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Story 4. The Rest Stop with No Exit. Thomas Waverly had been driving commercially for 11 years, primarily running routes through the American Southeast. On June 6, 2018, Thomas pulled into a rest stop in rural Georgia for what should have been a brief break. He would discover that this particular rest stop had an entrance but no exit. Not because the exit was blocked or hidden, but because exiting required leaving in a different way than entering. And Thomas would spend what felt like months trying to understand the logic of escape from a place designed to keep travelers forever. It was 3:47 a.m. when Thomas took the exit for the rest area on Interstate 16, about 60 miles west of Savannah. He'd been driving for 7 hours and needed to use the restroom and stretch his legs. The rest stop appeared normal from the highway, standard signage, adequate lighting, the usual configuration of parking lots and facilities. Thomas pulled into a parking space and walked toward the main building. The facility was unusually nice for a rural Georgia rest stop, well-maintained, modern, with amenities that seemed more appropriate for a major welcome center than a simple rest area. But Thomas didn't think much of it. Georgia had been upgrading its highway infrastructure, and new facilities were appearing regularly. Thomas used the restroom, washed his hands, and bought a coffee from a vending machine. Total elapsed time, maybe 12 minutes. He walked back to his truck, climbed in, and prepared to return to the highway. He started his engine and drove toward the rest area exit. The sign clearly indicated I-16 East or I-16 West. Thomas needed to go east toward Savannah, so he followed the arrows toward the eastbound ramp. The ramp curved up and around, then merged back into the rest area parking lot. Thomas found himself pulling into a parking space, having somehow circled back to his starting point without ever reaching the actual highway. Thomas sat confused for a moment. He'd obviously taken a wrong turn, gotten disoriented in the dark. He drove toward the exit again, this time paying more careful attention to the signage. Again, the ramp curved up and around, and again he found himself back in the rest area parking lot. "What the hell?" Thomas muttered. He tried a third time and a fourth, each time following what appeared to be the exit ramp, only to find himself looping back to the parking area. It was as if the exit was somehow connected to the entrance, creating a closed loop that didn't actually lead to the highway. Thomas got out of his truck and walked toward the exit on foot, trying to understand the geometry of the situation. The exit ramp clearly climbed upward, heading toward what should be an overpass that would carry him either over or under I-16 before merging. But as Thomas walked up the ramp, He found himself walking in a circle. The ramp curved 360 degrees, descending back to ground level and depositing him back at the rest area parking lot. The ramp was a complete circle. It led nowhere except back to itself. Thomas pulled out his phone to call for help, but he had no cellular signal. That wasn't unusual in rural Georgia, but it added to his growing sense of disorientation. He walked back to the main building to ask for assistance. The building was well lit and appeared operational. But when Thomas entered, he found it completely empty. No staff, no other travelers, no one. Just a clean, well-maintained facility with lights on and vending machines humming, but utterly devoid of human presence. "Hello?" Thomas called out. His voice echoed in the empty building. "Is anyone here?" No response. Thomas walked through the entire facility. Restrooms, vending area, information kiosk, outside seating areas. Not a single person anywhere. Even the parking lot, which had held several vehicles when Thomas first arrived, was now empty except for his own truck. Thomas felt panic rising. This wasn't right. Rest stops don't trap people. Exits don't loop back to their own starting points. Facilities don't empty out in minutes. He got back in his truck and tried the exit again, this time driving at high speed, determined to force his way out through sheer velocity. But the physics of the loop were consistent. No matter how fast he drove up the ramp, it curved around and deposited him back in the parking lot. The faster he went, the sharper the curve felt, as if the geometry was adjusting to prevent his escape. Thomas tried different approaches. He drove across the grass, attempting to bypass the official exit and create his own route back to the highway. But the terrain seemed to extend infinitely in all directions away from the rest stop. He drove for 10 minutes through empty fields only to find himself somehow back in the parking lot as if he'd never left. He tried backing his truck out, reasoning that perhaps the entrance was still functional even if the exit wasn't. But the entrance ramp, when approached from inside the rest stop, also looped back to the parking lot. There was no way to leave. Hours passed. Thomas tried everything he could think of. Different speeds, different angles, different combinations of backing and forward motion. Nothing worked. The rest stop had become a trap, a closed system with no outlet, a place you could enter but never leave. Around 6 a.m., according to Thomas's watch, the sun should have risen. But the sky remained dark, not the deep darkness of night, but a weird gray twilight that suggested dawn without ever actually brightening into day. The lighting was ambient, sourceless, providing enough illumination to see but no actual sun. Thomas realized with horror that he might be completely stuck here. If no one else arrived, if no help came, he could be trapped in this rest stop indefinitely. His truck had fuel for maybe 2 more days of running the engine to keep warm. His food supplies were minimal, a few snacks, some bottled water. If he couldn't escape soon, he'd face serious survival problems. Thomas spent the next several hours, or what his watch indicated were hours, though time felt increasingly unreliable, exploring the rest stop in detail, looking for any clue about how to escape. He found several strange things. First, the informational plaques and signs throughout the rest stop all had dates in the future, 2024, 2027, 2031. They referenced events that hadn't happened yet, improvements and upgrades that were supposedly completed years from now. Second, the vending machines were fully stocked with products Thomas didn't recognize. Brands that didn't exist, flavors that hadn't been invented, packaging with copyright dates in future years. When Thomas tried to buy something, the machine dispensed products, but his money was immediately returned to the coin return as if the transaction couldn't actually complete. Third, the restrooms had a strange property. Every time Thomas used them and came back out, the rest stop had subtly changed. Different vehicles in the parking lot, though still no drivers. Different items in the vending machines, slightly different architecture to the building itself. It was as if each restroom visit was shifting him to a slightly different version of the rest stop. Thomas experimented with this, going in and out of the restrooms repeatedly, watching the rest stop transform slightly each time. Sometimes the changes were minimal, a different trash can design, a different paint color on the walls. Sometimes they were more dramatic. The building layout would change, adding or removing sections, altering the floor plan entirely. After perhaps the 20th iteration of these changes, Thomas found a version of the rest stop that included something new. Other people. Not many, just 3 others, but their presence was an enormous relief. Thomas approached a man who was sitting at a picnic table outside, staring at nothing. "Excuse me, how long have you been here?" The man turned slowly, his movements oddly mechanical. "Here? I've always been here. This is where I am." "No, I mean, when did you arrive? What date did you enter this rest stop?" "Date?" The man looked confused by the concept. "I don't understand the question. I'm here. That's all there is." Thomas tried questioning the other 2 people, a woman and a younger man, but received similar responses. They acknowledged being at the rest stop but had no memory of arriving, no sense of time passing, no understanding that they were trapped. They existed in a perpetual present, aware of their immediate surroundings but incapable of conceiving of time or escape. Thomas realized with horror that these people had been trapped here so long they'd lost their connection to linear time, their memories of the outside world, their very concept of leaving. They'd been assimilated into the rest stop, become permanent features of it like the vending machines or picnic tables. "I need to get out before that happens to me," Thomas said aloud. He continued exploring, cycling through more rest stop iterations by using the restrooms as a kind of dimensional shift trigger. After 30 or 40 cycles, Thomas found a version that included a paper map posted on an information board. The map showed the rest stop's location on I-16, but the highway itself was drawn incorrectly. It looped around the rest stop in an impossible figure-8 pattern, as if the rest stop existed at an intersection point of the highway with itself. Thomas studied the map carefully. If the highway actually looped through the rest stop in a figure-8, then there might be a point where the 2 loops intersected, a crossing point where eastbound and westbound I-16 met inside the rest stop itself. And at that intersection, there might be a way to transition from one loop to the other and potentially escape. Thomas returned to his truck and drove toward the exit again. But this time, instead of completing the loop, he stopped at what he calculated should be the intersection point, the moment where his circular exit ramp should be crossing over or under the entrance ramp. He parked his truck at that specific spot and waited. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then Thomas felt a strange vibration, a sense of overlapping realities. Looking out his windshield, he could see 2 different versions of the rest stop simultaneously. One where he was on the exit ramp, and another where he was on the entrance ramp. The views overlapped like a double-exposed photograph. Thomas put his truck in gear and accelerated forward while the overlap was occurring. The world blurred and shifted. The dual images of exit and entrance merged and separated. Thomas felt a sensation like falling or rising or both simultaneously. Then suddenly he was on Interstate 16 eastbound. Real highway, real traffic, real daylight. The sun was up, traffic was flowing normally, and Thomas's GPS showed him approximately 60 miles west of Savannah, exactly where he should be. Thomas pulled onto the shoulder and sat shaking. According to his truck's clock, it was 4:03 a.m., only 16 minutes after he'd first entered the rest stop. But his watch showed 9:47 a.m., almost 6 hours later. And Thomas felt like days had passed, maybe weeks, cycling through dozens of iterations of the rest stop, trying to find the escape route. Thomas continued to Savannah, completed his delivery, and immediately drove to a police station to report the incident. but when he tried to describe what had happened and where, he couldn't provide a location. The rest stop wasn't on his GPS. There was no exit number that matched his memory. Checking Georgia Department of Transportation maps showed no rest areas in that section of I-16. The rest stop didn't officially exist. Thomas tried to find it again on subsequent trips, taking the same route at the same time of night, but the rest stop never appeared. Either it was gone, or Thomas was no longer in the right state or time to see it. But Thomas knows it's still out there, a rest stop with no exit, existing in a loop that traps travelers. The people Thomas saw there, the ones who'd lost their memories and sense of time, were probably still trapped, cycling through iterations of the rest stop eternally, unable to remember that escape was even possible. Thomas reported the incident to trucking forums and driver networks, warning others about rest stops that felt wrong, that had strange properties, that seemed to exist outside normal geography. A few other drivers reported similar experiences. Rest stops they'd entered but struggled to leave, facilities that seemed to loop back on themselves, places where time behaved strangely. But no one else had found Thomas's specific rest stop. It remained unique, singular, a trap that had almost consumed Thomas and still held however many others who hadn't found the intersection point where realities overlapped. Thomas still drives through Georgia on I-16, but he never stops at rest areas anymore. He'll drive hours out of his way to refuel at truck stops or service plazas where multiple exits confirm that leaving is possible. He's terrified of entering another rest stop with no exit, of becoming trapped in a loop where the only way out requires cycling through dozens of iterations and finding intersection points that may not exist. Some rest stops are exactly what they appear to be, safe places to rest. But others are something different, traps disguised as conveniences, loops designed to collect travelers, places where the exit is only theoretical and leaving requires understanding impossible geometries. The rest stop with no exit is still there somewhere on I-16 in Georgia, appearing to drivers at specific times or in specific states of mind. And anyone who enters will find themselves looping back to the parking lot, cycling through iterations, slowly losing their memories and sense of time until they become permanent residents of a place designed to keep travelers forever. Thomas escaped, but others didn't. And the rest stop continues to collect, continues to trap, continues to exist in its closed loop where exit and entrance are the same thing, and leaving requires finding the intersection point where contradictory realities overlap. Watch for the signs. Question rest stops that feel too nice, too modern, too empty. And if you find yourself unable to leave, if the exit loops back to where you started, look for the intersection point. Look for the moment where two versions of the road meet inside the rest stop, and drive through that point fast before the overlap collapses and you're trapped in the loop forever. Thomas found it in time, but he knows that many others haven't, and many more never will. Story 5. The Mirror Truck. Elena Rodriguez had been an owner-operator for 20 years, running specialized hazmat deliveries that required extensive certifications and careful handling. On January 14, 2022, Elena was hauling a load of industrial chemicals from Houston to Albuquerque when she noticed another truck following her that was identical to her own. Not similar, but identical in every detail. Elena would discover that the mirror truck wasn't following her but existing in parallel to her. That every choice she made was being mirrored by another version of herself driving an identical route in a parallel timeline, and that the barrier between the two timelines was becoming dangerously thin. Elena departed Houston at 4 p.m. with a full load of chemical reagents destined for a research facility in New Mexico. The load required careful temperature control and smooth driving. Sudden movements or temperature fluctuations could destabilize the chemicals. Elena had transported similar loads dozens of times and knew the protocols intimately. The route took her west on Interstate 10 through Texas, then north on Interstate 25 through New Mexico to Albuquerque. Total distance approximately 900 miles, estimated driving time around 14 hours with mandatory rest stops. Around 7:00 p.m. as Elena was driving through the desolate stretch of West Texas between San Antonio and El Paso, she noticed a truck in her mirrors. The truck was maintaining a consistent distance, about a quarter-mile back, and appeared to be matching Elena's speed exactly. That wasn't unusual. Trucks often traveled at similar speeds and ended up in loose convoys. But as darkness fell and Elena got better looks at the following truck in her mirrors and headlights, she noticed something disturbing. The truck was identical to hers. Same make, same model, same color scheme, same company logo, same unit number painted on the cab. Elena keyed her CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Chem Transport 17 calling the truck behind me on I-10 westbound. You're showing the same unit number as me. You might want to check if you're broadcasting the right ID." No response. Elena tried several more times on different channels. Silence. Elena decided to test whether the truck was actually following her intentionally. She sped up to 75 miles per hour. The mirror truck sped up, maintaining exactly the same distance. Elena slowed to 55 miles per hour. The mirror truck slowed, still keeping the same spacing. Elena changed lanes. The mirror truck changed lanes at exactly the same moment. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, as if choreographed, or as if the mirror truck was somehow receiving the same inputs Elena was giving her truck. Elena pulled off at the next exit, a small town called Fort Stockton, intending to let the mirror truck pass so she could see the driver and hopefully get an explanation. But as Elena exited, the mirror truck also exited, following her off the highway and into the town. Elena pulled into a gas station parking lot. The mirror truck pulled into the same parking lot, taking a spot exactly parallel to Elena's position, but about 50 yards away. Elena got out of her truck and walked toward the mirror truck, determined to confront whoever was driving it and understand why they were copying her movements so precisely. As Elena approached, she saw the driver's door of the mirror truck open. Someone stepped out, a woman wearing the same uniform as Elena, with the same build, the same posture. As the figure turned toward her, Elena felt reality tilting beneath her feet. The driver of the mirror truck was Elena Rodriguez. Same face, same hair, same expression of confusion and concern. Elena was looking at herself. The two Elenas stared at each other for a long moment. Then the other Elena spoke, her voice identical to Elena's own. "Who are you? Why are you driving my truck?" "I'm Elena Rodriguez, that's my truck. Who the hell are you?" "I'm Elena Rodriguez, this is my truck. I'm hauling chemicals from Houston to Albuquerque. I've been making this run for 20 years. They were saying the same things, claiming the same identity, insisting on the same reality. Elena felt her mind fragmenting. She looked back at her own truck, then at the mirror truck. They were absolutely identical, same plates, same unit numbers, same minor damage on the front bumper that Elena had gotten in a parking lot 3 months ago. "This isn't possible," Elena said. "There can't be two of us." "I agree, but here we are." The other Elena pulled out her phone and showed her driver's license. Elena Rodriguez, same birth date, same address, same CDL number. Identical to Elena's own license in every detail. Elena pulled out her own phone and compared. The licenses were duplicates. Both women had the same legal identity, the same credentials, the same history. "Are you me from another timeline?" Elena asked, grasping for any explanation that made sense. "Maybe. Or you're me from another timeline. Or we're both real in parallel timelines and something has caused the timelines to come close enough that we can see each other." As the two Elenas talked, they noticed something disturbing. The air between them was shimmering, distorting like heat waves, and through that distortion they could see other things. Faint images of other trucks, other gas stations, other versions of themselves, conducting the same conversation in slightly different ways. The timelines are merging, the other Elena said, or overlapping. We're seeing through to each other's realities because the barrier between them is breaking down. Why is this happening? I don't know, but I think it has something to do with what we're carrying. The chemicals I'm transporting are quantum sensitive. They're used in experiments that involve quantum entanglement and parallel state manipulation. Maybe hauling them has somehow entangled us across timelines. Elena thought about her own cargo. The same description, the same destination. If both versions of Elena were carrying quantum-sensitive chemicals, and if those chemicals were somehow creating or enhancing quantum entanglement, then the two timelines might be literally merging around the trucks and their drivers. We need to separate, Elena said. Put distance between us. Maybe if we're farther apart, the timelines will stabilize and stop overlapping. Agreed. You continue west on I-10. I'll take Highway 290. We'll take different routes to Albuquerque. The two Elenas returned to their respective trucks. But as Elena started her engine and prepared to leave, she noticed something horrifying in her mirror. The other Elena's truck was fading, becoming translucent. Through the mirror truck, Elena could see the parking lot behind it. The mirror truck was disappearing, or merging, or being absorbed. Elena jumped out of her truck and ran back toward the other Elena, who was also getting out of her truck, looking panicked. "What's happening?" the other Elena called out. "Your truck is disappearing." "No, yours is. I can see right through it." They were both becoming translucent, both fading, as if the two timelines were collapsing into a single timeline, and only one version of Elena and her truck could exist in the merged reality. "If the timelines merge completely," the other Elena said, "only one of us will remain real. The other will be erased, absorbed, cease to exist. How do we stop it? I don't know. Maybe we can't. Maybe this was always going to happen. The quantum cargo creating entanglement between timelines, eventually forcing them to collapse into one." Elena felt herself becoming less solid, less substantial. She could see through her own hands. The other Elena was experiencing the same thing, both of them becoming ghost-like as their timelines fought to merge into a single coherent reality. "I don't want to stop existing," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "Neither do I, but one of us has to. Reality can't support two identical states simultaneously. When the timelines finish merging, one of us will be real and one will be erased." They stood in the parking lot, both fading, both terrified, waiting to see which version of Elena Rodriguez would survive the timeline merge and which would be obliterated from existence. The process took hours. During that time, the two Elenas talked, sharing memories, comparing their lives. They discovered that they were identical up until about 3 years ago, when their timelines had diverged over a single choice. In one timeline, Elena had accepted a specific high-risk delivery contract. In the other timeline, she'd declined it. That single decision had created a branch, and the two timelines had existed separately ever since. Now the quantum cargo was collapsing the branch, forcing the timelines back together, and only one version of Elena's choice could survive. Around 2 a.m., the process completed. One Elena became solid and real. The other faded completely, vanishing like she'd never existed. But Elena, the surviving Elena, couldn't tell which version she was. She had memories from both timelines, both choices, both versions of the past 3 years. The merge had combined their histories into a single, confused narrative. Elena looked at her truck. It was solid, real, fully loaded with chemical cargo. The mirror truck was gone. No sign it had ever existed. Elena checked her license. Elena Rodriguez, same as always. But she couldn't remember if she'd accepted that risky delivery contract 3 years ago or declined it. Both memories seemed equally real. Elena completed the delivery to Albuquerque, but she was fundamentally changed. She existed now as a merged entity carrying memories from two timelines, never certain which choices she'd actually made and which were imports from the absorbed timeline. Over the following weeks, Elena experienced more timeline distortions. She'd meet people who remembered things about her that she didn't remember, or who had no memory of events Elena clearly recalled. Her apartment sometimes had furniture arrangements she didn't recognize. Her bank account had slightly different balances than expected. Elena realized that the timeline merge hadn't been complete or clean. Fragments of the absorbed timeline still existed, creating inconsistencies in her reality. She was living in a patchwork timeline, assembled from pieces of both versions, and the seams showed in small but disturbing ways. Other hazmat drivers began reporting similar experiences, seeing mirror trucks, meeting duplicate versions of themselves, experiencing timeline merges when hauling quantum-sensitive cargo. The phenomenon was apparently common but unreported, happening to drivers who carried materials that could entangle parallel realities. Elena eventually learned that the quantum cargo was part of classified research into parallel universes and timeline manipulation. The chemicals she'd been hauling were literally thinning the barriers between parallel timelines, and drivers like her were experiencing the side effects: encounters with their parallel selves, timeline merges, reality distortions. The research facility in Albuquerque offered Elena a consulting position, helping them understand the subjective experience of timeline overlap from the perspective of someone who'd survived a merge. Elena accepted, hoping to understand what had happened to her, and whether the absorbed version of herself had truly ceased to exist or continued somewhere in the quantum foam of collapsed possibilities. But Elena never got clear answers. The scientists couldn't tell her which timeline she'd originated from or which version of herself had been primary. She was a merged entity, a combination of two Elenas from two slightly different histories, and there was no way to separate the components or determine which was real. Elena no longer drives. She works at the research facility, consulting on timeline physics and helping develop protocols to prevent future merges. But she's forever uncertain about her own past, her own identity, her own reality. She's a woman composed of two timelines, carrying memories from both, never fully sure which version of herself survived the merge and which was absorbed into the quantum background of collapsed possibilities. The mirror truck is gone. But somewhere in the physics of parallel timelines and quantum entanglement, the other Elena might still exist. Not as a separate entity, but as part of the Elena who survived, carried forward as memories and experiences that feel simultaneously real and fictional. Elena Rodriguez is both versions and neither version. She's a merged entity, a collapsed wave function, a quantum superposition that was forced to resolve into a single state, and she'll never know which state was primary and which was absorbed. The mirror truck taught Elena that reality is more fragile than we think, that our identities exist across multiple timelines, and that quantum cargo can collapse those timelines into single narratives where only one version of yourself survives and the others are erased from existence but never completely gone. If you're hauling quantum-sensitive cargo and you see a mirror truck, a vehicle identical to yours driven by someone who looks exactly like you, understand that you're experiencing timeline overlap, and when the timelines merge, only one of you will remain. The other will be absorbed, becoming memories and experiences carried by the survivor. Fragments of a timeline that collapsed into the one you're living now. Elena survived, but she'll never know if she was the original or the copy, the primary timeline or the absorbed one. She's both and neither. Forever uncertain, forever merged, forever carrying the ghost of the Elena she might have been or might have absorbed. Story 6. The fuel stop that sold years. David Kowalski had been driving long-haul routes for 17 years, specializing in cross-country deliveries that could take a week or more to complete. On September 2, 2019, David stopped for fuel at what appeared to be a small independent truck stop in rural Wyoming, a place that sold not just diesel and food, but something far more valuable and terrible: time itself. And David would learn that purchasing years of youth came with a price that compounded with interest, paid not in money, but in memories, relationships, and eventually identity itself. David was driving from Seattle to Nashville, hauling a load of technology equipment on a tight deadline. He'd been driving for 11 hours and was low on fuel, navigating the empty stretches of Wyoming on Interstate 80 around 1 a.m. A sign appeared announcing Rusty's Fuel and Food, next exit, and David took it, pulling off the highway into a small facility that looked like it had been operating since the 1950s. The place was old but clean, with a weathered appearance that suggested decades of faithful service to travelers. 2 fuel islands, a small convenience store, a diner attached to the main building. A single clerk was visible through the store windows, and a few vehicles sat in the parking lot. It looked like 1,000 other small truck stops David had visited over his career. David pulled up to the diesel pumps and began fueling. As the tank filled, an older man, maybe 70, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent their life working outdoors, approached from the store. "Evening, driver, you look tired. Been driving all day? Got a long way to go yet?" "Most drivers do. That's the business, isn't it? Always rushing, always behind schedule, always tired. Time's never on your side in this line of work." David nodded, not particularly interested in conversation, but too polite to brush off the old man. "What if I told you," the old man continued, "that we sell something here that most truck stops don't? Something that could help you with your schedule, your exhaustion, your whole career?" "What, amphetamines?" David laughed bitterly. "I'm not interested in illegal stims." "Nothing illegal, just time. We sell years." David looked at the old man more carefully, trying to determine if this was senility or a joke. "You sell years. That's right. Come inside, I'll show you." Curious despite himself, David followed the old man into the convenience store. The interior was normal: snacks, drinks, trucker supplies. But in the back, behind the register, was a small office with a desk and filing cabinet. The old man pulled out a ledger, an actual handwritten ledger, not a computer system, and opened it to reveal columns of names, dates, and numbers. "Here's how it works," the old man explained. "You can purchase time, years of youth, of energy, of prime physical condition. You tell me how many years you want, and we make the transaction. You walk out of here younger, stronger, better able to handle the demands of your job." "This is insane. You can't sell time." "Can't I? Look at me." The old man held up a driver's license. According to the license, his name was Russell Talbot, and his birth date showed he was 92 years old. But the man standing in front of David looked maybe 70 at most. "I've purchased 22 years over the course of my life," Russell said. "Bought them from my father, who ran this station before me and learned the secret from someone else. The station has been selling time for over 100 years, helping travelers who need it. What's the cost?" "Ah, that's the important question. The cost isn't money. Well, there's a token payment, but that's not what you're really paying. The cost is memories. For each year you purchase, you lose an equivalent amount of memories. Not random memories, the oldest ones. Your childhood fades. Your early experiences disappear. You're younger in body, but older in experience, if that makes sense." David felt a chill. "You're telling me I can buy years of youth by selling my childhood memories?" "Exactly. Most drivers figure it's a good trade. Who needs memories of being 10 years old when you're trying to make a living at 40 or 50? The past is useless. Youth and energy are valuable. David thought about it. He was 41 years old and feeling every year of it. His back hurt constantly from the driving. His knees were developing arthritis. He was always exhausted, struggling to maintain the pace that younger drivers could handle easily. If he could be 30 again, even for just a few years, it would make his job so much easier. "How much for 5 years?" David asked. 5 years costs 5 years. You'll lose everything before you were 6 years old. Infancy, early childhood, first memories, all gone. But you'll be 36 physically. Stronger, healthier, better rested. Is it worth it? David thought about his earliest memories. They were fragmented anyway, impressions of his parents, a few specific incidents, general feelings. He couldn't remember much from before age 6 with clarity anyway. What was he really losing? "I'll take it." Russell prepared paperwork. Bizarre contracts full of archaic language about memory transfers and temporal adjustments. David signed, paid a token amount, $111, which Russell said was symbolic rather than actual payment, and drank a small vial of liquid that tasted like metal and electricity. The change was immediate. David felt energy flooding through him, felt his back pain vanishing, felt strength returning to muscles that had been declining for years. He looked at his hands and saw them younger, smoother, less damaged by years of wear. He walked to the restroom and looked in the mirror. His face was clearly younger, the lines and gray hair reduced or eliminated. He was physically 36 again. David also immediately noticed the memory loss. When he tried to think about his early childhood, there was nothing. No memories of being 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That entire period of his life was simply gone, erased, leaving a blank space where his earliest years should have been. But David felt so good physically that he dismissed the memory loss as acceptable. He thanked Russell, returned to his truck, and continued his route to Nashville, feeling better than he had in years. The delivery went smoothly. David's renewed energy and lack of pain made the driving easy. He completed the run ahead of schedule, his dispatcher noting how efficient he'd been. David felt like he'd regained years of his career, and the cost of some childhood memories seemed trivial. Over the following months, David sought out Russell's truck stop whenever his routes took him through Wyoming. Each time he purchased more years, 2 years here, 3 years there, eventually buying enough time to physically be in his mid-20s despite being chronologically in his 40s. And with each purchase, more memories disappeared. First his childhood, then his adolescence, then his early 20s. David lost memories of high school, of his first girlfriend, of learning to drive, of his early jobs. All of it erased, converted into physical youth. David didn't realize the full extent of what he was losing until he stopped at his mother's house for a visit. She showed him photo albums, and David couldn't remember any of the events depicted. Family vacations, holidays, significant moments, all gone from his memory. His mother talked about incidents from his past, and David had no recollection of any of them. "Are you feeling all right?" his mother asked, concerned by David's blank responses. "You seem like you don't remember your own life." "I remember," David lied. "I'm just tired." But David was worried. He'd lost so much of his past that he was becoming disconnected from his own identity. Who was David Kowalski if he couldn't remember being David Kowalski? Despite his concerns, David returned to Russell's truck stop. The physical benefits of youth were too valuable to give up. He purchased more years, trading more memories, until he was physically 21 despite being chronologically 47. But now David had almost no memories before age 30. He'd effectively erased 17 years of his life. His entire childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. He was a man with a 17-year personal history, despite having lived for nearly 5 decades. And David discovered something terrible. Relationships require shared memories. His mother could no longer connect with him because he didn't remember their shared past. Old friends drifted away because David couldn't reminisce about their experiences together. Even David's sense of self was fragmenting. He was physically a young man, but chronologically much older, with a truncated memory that didn't align with either identity. David tried to stop purchasing years, to preserve what memories he had left. But the physical aging returned immediately. Within weeks, his body began reverting to its chronological age. The pain returned, the exhaustion, the decline. David realized that the years he'd purchased weren't permanent. They had to be renewed regularly, like a subscription service, or the aging would resume. David was trapped. To maintain his physical youth, he had to keep purchasing years and keep losing memories. But every purchase erased more of his identity, more of his relationships, more of who he fundamentally was. In desperation, David returned to Russell's truck stop one more time. How do I reverse this? How do I get my memories back? Russell looked sad. You can't. The memories are gone, converted into physical time. They don't exist anymore to be returned. You traded them for youth, and that trade is permanent. Then I'll stop buying years. I'll accept aging like normal. You can do that. But you've purchased so many years that stopping now will cause rapid aging compensation. Your body will try to catch up to your chronological age all at once. The sudden aging could be catastrophic: heart attack, stroke, organ failure. You've created a temporal debt, and if you stop making payments, the debt comes due immediately and violently. David realized the full horror of his situation. He was trapped in a cycle of purchasing years to avoid catastrophic aging, and every purchase erased more of his identity until eventually he'd have no memories at all. Just a young body with no personal history, no sense of self, no connection to his own past. How long can I keep this up? David asked. Until you've purchased your entire life. Some customers have done that, bought so many years that they erased their entire personal history. They became functionally newborns in adult bodies, young, healthy, but with no memories, no identity, no sense of who they were. We had to teach them their own names. David left the truck stop in tears. He was physically 21, but chronologically 47, with only memories from the past 17 years. Trapped in a cycle that would eventually erase everything that made him David Kowalski. Over the following years, David continued the cycle because the alternative was death from rapid aging. He kept purchasing years and kept losing memories. His mother died, and David barely grieved because he remembered so little of their relationship. Friends stopped calling because David didn't recognize them. David's marriage ended because his wife couldn't love someone who didn't remember their courtship, their wedding, their shared life. Eventually, David purchased enough years that he'd erased every memory before age 40. He was physically in his early 20s, but remembered only the past 7 years of his life. Everything before that was gone. His childhood, his adolescence, his early career, his marriage, his entire personal history. David existed now as a young man with a mysteriously blank past, explaining away his lack of memories by claiming amnesia from an accident. He continued to drive, continued to work, but he was a ghost of who he'd been. A body without a life story, youth purchased at the cost of identity itself. And still, David returned to Russell's truck stop, buying more years, losing more memories, caught in a trap that would eventually erase everything. Russell warned him that he was approaching the end, that soon David would purchase years that didn't exist yet, that he'd be buying his own future and creating temporal paradoxes that might erase him entirely. But David couldn't stop. The alternative was to allow the temporal debt to collect, to age decades and moments, to die from the compound interest on all the years he'd borrowed. So David kept buying, kept losing, kept becoming less himself with each transaction. Russell's truck stop still operates on I-80 in Wyoming, selling years to desperate travelers who value youth more than identity. And drivers still stop there, still make the trade, still purchase time at the cost of memories. They all believe they'll be different, that they'll purchase just a few years and maintain control. But the debt compounds, the aging resumes, and eventually they're trapped in the same cycle as David Kowalski. Buying years to avoid aging, losing memories to purchase youth, slowly erasing themselves until nothing remains but a young body with no past. If you're driving through Wyoming and you see a sign for Rusty's Fuel and Food, consider passing it by. The fuel is normal, but the other services, the years for sale, the youth available for purchase, come with a price that seems reasonable until you've paid it. And by then, you've lost too much of yourself to remember why you wanted youth in the first place. David Kowalski is still out there, still driving, still physically in his early 20s despite being chronologically in his 50s. Still purchasing years, still losing memories, still trapped in a cycle that will eventually erase him completely. Still stopping at Russell's truck stop every few months to make another payment on the temporal debt that will never be fully repaid. The fuel stop that sells years is still operating. And desperate drivers still trade their pasts for their presents, their identities for their physicality, their memories for their mobility. They all think they'll be different. They're all wrong.